After 3 days in Edinburgh, I'm ready to continue with my push north to John O'Groats. My first stop along the way was the famous battleground for William Wallace, the Battle of Stirling Bridge in Stirling. The Battle of Stirling Bridge was a very important event in Scottish history, and rightly so. It is also one of the most romanticized events of the First War of Scottish independence, along with Wallace himself. There are many different accounts of what actually happened here, and then somewhere in that, there is what actually happened here. No matter what the truth about this event actually is, it is really great to be here. It certainly feels like sacred ground to me. The first and most obvious depiction of William Wallace and the Battle of Stirling Bridge comes from the film Braveheart, and while I think this film is great, it brought much deserved attention to William Wallace's name and his achievements. It's very romanticized, and not even close to being historically accurate. The victory in Braveheart at the Battle of Stirling didn't even involve a bridge, and instead had two standing armies on level ground in an open field, both seeming to adhere to the conventional rules of war. In the film, victory is achieved by a surprise row of pikes that catch the cavalry off guard, followed by a fierce charge from the infantry, leading to a Scottish victory. Another account comes from Blind Harry. Blind Harry was a Scottish author from the time who documented Wallace's life. Much of the information we have on Wallace comes from Blind Harry, but he is widely regarded as unhistorical. In Blind Harry's account, the combined forces of Andrew de Moray and William Wallace defeated the English by setting up the old timber bridge to be destroyed as the English crossed it, and then attacking them in the chaos that followed. What most modern-day historians agree upon is this. The initiator and leader of the rebellion against the English, William Wallace and his forces, were joined up with Andrew Moray and his forces. Andrew Moray was a Scottish noble, often depicted as fighting with both a sword and axe, carrying his sigil of 3 stars on a blue field. On September 11, 1297, Wallace and Moray and their combined forces met at Stirling to meet the combined English forces led by Hugh de Cressingham and John de Warenne, King Edward of England's ranking men overseeing the Kingdom of Scotland. These 4 men met before the battle to agree on terms, those terms only being that the battle would be fought honorably and fairly, both sides agreeing to obey the rules of war of that time, an agreement that Moray and Wallace had no intention on keeping, and almost immediately broke. The army of the English was so big and so advanced with so many horses it would have taken hours for them to cross Stirling Bridge. Stirling Bridge at that time only being a small timber bridge. Before the entire English army could even cross, let alone properly assemble, like the agreed upon rules of war demanded, the Scots attacked. The very surprised English were standing on wetlands and completely unprepared for the Scots' attack, and in short, they were simply crushed, leaving Hugh de Cressingham dead and John de Warenne to flee to safety in York. The last thing I would call this tactic is honorable, but it certainly was effective. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and these were desperate times for the Scots. They defeated their cruel overseers by any means necessary. These brutal times are hard for us to fathom. After the battle, William Wallace flayed Hugh de Cressingham's body, peeling his skin from heel to neck to make a decorative belt for his sword, and piecing out the rest of his skin into smaller pieces as souvenirs for his men. And we all know the fate of Wallace. In the end, he was betrayed by his own countrymen, mutilated, drawn, and quartered. Brutal times. This is Stirling Bridge today, with the spike of the Wallace monument clearly visible behind. About 150 meters downstream from the aforementioned Stirling Bridge, where the battle was fought, this more permanent stone bridge was erected sometime in the 1500s. Built mainly to aid the defense of Stirling Castle, Stirling Bridge is wide at one end and narrow at the other to prevent the crossing of enemy siege equipment. In this direction was the old timber Stirling Bridge of the battle. In 1745, during the Jacobite Rebellion, part of this bridge was intentionally blown up to prevent the Highlanders from crossing into the lowlands by General Blakeney. I arrived in the UK in mid-September, during some very warm weather, but the further I go north, the more I feel autumn's chills start to set in, and here in Stirling, you can even see the fall colors just starting to come in. My first real glimpse of a river here in Scotland is looking at the swirling River Forth. To me it was shocking just how dark the water was, but this is due to the high concentration of peat in the Scottish soil. As I walk around the side of the bridge, try and take notice of the stonework. The difference in time periods from building is very clear to see. I wonder what old Stirling Bridge looked like before it was purposely demolished in the 1700s, and if indeed this contrast in building materials is from the rebuilding phase. After thoroughly checking out the bridge and the little town of Stirling, I decide it's time to head up to the Wallace Monument itself. Inside the welcoming center for the monument, the popularity of the film Braveheart is clearly shown. I just grab my ticket and head on up to the monument itself. Up on the hill at the Abbey Crag, at the base of the Wallace Monument, the wind is really starting to pick up. Inside the Wallace Monument, I just head straight up the stairs. There are so many things inside this monument that I have been waiting to see. The whole place inside is like a dedication or a museum to the life and times of William Wallace. I really enjoyed this modern version of a medieval tapestry depicting Wallace's involvement in the Scottish War of Independence. There is really so much information inside. You can learn everything that is known about William Wallace's life and times by exploring these little rooms on the way up the winding stairs to the top of the monument. The second part of the tapestry details the end of Wallace's life and the blowback that ensued among the Scottish people, eventually leading to the independence of Scotland. But of all the relics and documents on display here, none can compare to the coolness factor that is the Wallace sword. Now, it's a good question to ask, is this really Wallace's sword? I believe the answer to be yes. Of course, there are no records of the transference of ownership of the sword, given the political climate in Scotland in 1305 following Wallace's death. Do you know the fear one must inspire to be the absolute monarch of a nation? Who would ever keep written records of the transfer of ownership to preserve the sword of a man brutally executed for being a rebel and traitor? If you remember what I said about the fate of Hugh de Cressingham, this is certainly not his skin that decorates the sword. The only record of the sword you are looking at comes from a repair record in 1505 for King James IV of Scotland, and it was mentioned in this repair and restoration of Wallace's sword, and that it be bound with cords of silk, a new hilt and plummet, and a new scabbard and belt. So I would say the sword, as Wallace wielded it, was changed very much, but this is likely the original blade, and it's pretty amazing to be here looking at it now. Back outside and up some more stairs, I finally reached the top of the Wallace Monument. The view up here of Stirling, Stirling Bridge, and the battleground is quite impressive, and well worth the climb. But I'm afraid the wind is picking up so much it's making it a little scary. I have to admit to having a slight fear of heights, and up here, with the feeling that the wind would push me over the edge at any second, I have to admit they got the better of me a little bit. Being up here is very cool, and I'm still very glad I came up. There was even more information about the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and a good viewpoint to understand exactly how it worked, but in the end, I couldn't get back to the ground floor fast enough. At the bottom, there is of course a gift shop, where I picked up this, a Braveheart bear, and brought it home to be the new buddy of this great Will kid of mine. And with that, I said my farewells to Stirling and the Wallace Monument. It was from the parking lot of the Wallace Monument that I made a few calls to try to get a ride out to the island of St. Kilda. I learned to my sorrow that nobody was going out this time of year, and that I missed it by a month or so. But this is the price I pay for traveling like I do. Not taking the time to plan ahead and just winging it sometimes just works out this way. So instead of going to the Isle of Skye and approaching Loch Ness from the south, I had to take a bit of a reroute. I ended up in St. Andrews. I thought I would make a stop at the old golf course in St. Andrews and get a couple souvenirs for the people back home that really enjoyed the game. Of course, there was a golf tournament going on when I was in the town. There was also some kind of student event at the St. Andrews University. And I can tell you without hesitation that finding parking in this town at this time was one of the biggest challenges of this whole trip. I ended up having to park on the very edge of town and walk all the way to the golf course. With some difficulty, I at last got to the gift shop. After getting some official merchandise for my brother Jer and my stepfather Dave, it was time to once again resume my press north and head for Loch Ness by way of the A9 through Cairngorms National Park. The drive up the A9 was very beautiful. On this drive, I mostly stuck to the main road. I was determined to get to Inverness before dark. But the further I got north, the more I got sidetracked with the beautiful side roads I could drive on. So I ended up doing what I normally do anyway, which is drive for a while, and then stop and explore, drive some more, stop and explore. I ended up not taking too many pictures or videos during this time. I just immersed myself in the drive and the landscape, and really tried to enjoy myself before getting back in the city. Most times when I got out of the car to have a walk around, I didn't even bring my phone or camera with me. Most of the time, thinking of having to take pictures and videos of what's around you prevents you from taking in your surroundings at all. I ended up meeting my goal of getting to Inverness before dark, but really just barely. And by the time I got in the city itself, it was dark already. In part 10, I'll be visiting Loch Ness and the Highlands. Thanks for watching.